Thank you. I'm tucking in my skirt so it doesn't blow up and flash you all. Fact to follow, right? Can I get a quick round of applause for our BSL interpreters who are doing a fantastic job? Okay. See, can I tuck it in now? MBs, ladies, gentlemen, I am here to talk to you about the truth. I'm not here today to talk to you about trans rights. I'm here today to talk to you about trans lives and the truth of trans lives that is not represented in our country's media. But first, I have an uncle who I never knew, and I will never know. My dad's little brother Francis, named after his dad, died in a football stadium collapse event known as the Hillsborough Disaster. My uncle, along with hundreds of other Liverpool football fans, were herded into a standing area, causing its structural collapse, which then killed 96 people, Francis included. This was the fault of the police negligence and incompetence. But when football fans started trying to escape the deadly crush and climb up the fence out of there, police climbed up the other side of the fence, according to witness reports, and shoved them back down into the deadly crush. They thought that the victims were dangerous football hooligans, rather than panicking people trying to escape a deadly situation that they, the police, had caused. On the 19th of April 1989, 4 days later, the Sun newspaper published a front page piece under the bold letters, "The Truth." They claimed that the football fans had picked victims' pockets, urinated on, quote, brave cops, and even attacked an officer who was trying to provide CPR. These disgraceful lies, apparent to Liverpudlians for what they were, resulted in a boycott campaign to not buy the Sun, which lasts to this day. There are many in Liverpool still who, if they walk into a shop and see that it sells the Sun, will walk back out again. It remains difficult to give away the Sun newspaper in Liverpool for free to this day. And let me tell you another interesting historical fact. Liverpool hasn't elected as much as a Conservative councillor in over 25 years. These facts are related. In 2017, when the Hillsborough inquiry concluded that the disaster was the fault of the police and not the victims, and that misinformation spread by the Sun and other right-wing rags contributed to a campaign of misinformation and cover-up, journalist Suzanne Moore wrote for The Guardian, "This fantasy should be well and truly shattered by the Hillsborough verdict. This was a war crime in a war that was not then, nor is now, a figment of our imagination. Class war." The especially bitter irony of the Sun's lies there, of course, is that they published them under the words, "The Truth." The phrase, "speak truth to power," is supposed to be the journalist's mantra. It's the phrase that journalists should see every time they close their eyes. It's the phrase that should dictate every action and effort made by journalists professionally. And yet, our country's media speaks with a forked tongue. The media loves to provide two options. One, patently bad. The other, the one they want you to agree with. Do you support dangerous football hooligans who urinate on brave officers? Or do you support brave cops? That's easy enough for right-wing papers who thrive on bigotry, of course. But for the mainstream and left-wing journalists, making tolerance and acceptance unpalatable is a little more difficult. And so they rely on debate. Debate whether trans people should be allowed to use public bathrooms. Debate whether we should be allowed in sports. Debate whether our lives are even worth living. Which, if my skirt keeps blowing up, mine might not be. From there, you can have all sorts of debates about the debate. Is it wrong to silence people who express bigoted views against trans people? Of course, all the while, platforming those people so they can have their side in the debate. But never, of course, allow trans people to just come on and tell the truth about our own lives. This is a debate for cis people only. And that's because the debate exists to legitimize bigotry, a position which should never be legitimized or even tolerated. So, when thousands of people marched at the end of June for Trans Pride, myself included, the BBC didn't even mention it. They instead reported on an anti-lockdown conspiracy theorist march that was happening the same day. Let's check these. The Telegraph published an article the day of Trans Pride claiming that children's TV shows are grooming children and coercing them to being trans. The Times published an article that day claiming trans equality legislation bullies bosses. You can't make this shit up. The Daily Mail, of course, published multiple articles that day talking about trans people brainwashing children. I think it was math classes using the right pronouns. Sainsbury's oppressing its staff by not allowing them to be transphobes. And most delicious of ironies, claiming that LGBT activists want to censor the news and control what information gets published. The Guardian, for their part, their coverage of Trans Pride was limited to 2 pictures in a collection of Pride celebrations from around the world. They actually published an article on the 26th, on the day of Trans Pride, that talked about how busy the cops were going to be that weekend with all the protests going on in London, which mentions every protest happening except Trans Pride. Left-wing papers don't get a break from this just because they sometimes also report on the horrific and deadly consequences of the same transgender debate narrative that they peddle. Take, for example, Suzanne Moore, the journalist I quoted just before. Moore is a prominent so-called gender-critical feminist. She believes that trans people existing is harmful to cisgender women and to feminism as a cause. She has written articles in The Guardian advocating that vulnerable trans women should be excluded from women's shelters. She has written promoting the social contagion myth that implies that trans people are coercing others into being trans using peer pressure. How is any of this different from what the Daily Mail writes, you ask? Good question. Okay, the Daily Mail doesn't care about feminism. But otherwise, the fear-mongering, bigoted lies are the same, just disguised as concern for women, arguments against misogyny, a debate around the trans issue. Suzanne Moore, not a member of the LGBT community herself, evokes the imagery of the AIDS crisis and the fight for gay and lesbian rights to try and position herself as a queer ally, while trying to push trans people out of public life. Moore actually left The Guardian after 300 feminists signed off on a letter calling out her bigotry. But she was there unchallenged for a long time. She is utterly emblematic of the kind of bigotry that papers like The Guardian treat as an equally valid side in a debate. The Guardian, be it through complacency, cowardice, or complicity, has not improved. Moore wrote, trying to dismiss claims of her bigotry, that, I want to get this quote right, "It is not feminists who murder trans people," although this might be the impression you would be left with if you relied solely on Twitter for your information. Ooh, she got us. Good one, Suzanne. No, actually, I agree with Moore here. It isn't feminists who murder trans people. It isn't. It's just people who call themselves feminists who get to write reactionary nonsense in The Guardian. It's just people who call themselves feminists, like J.K. Rowling, who gets awarded accolades by the BBC for writing, that's right, notorious pantomime villain J.K. Rowling, who get accolades from the BBC for writing misinformed transphobic defenses of bigotry, who get quoted by Republican senators who are voting down LGBT equality legislation. It's just people like Helen Lewis, who many bigots credit as making space for their concerns in the British media, and her husband, Jonathan Haynes, digital editor of The Guardian, who perpetuates the moral panic around the abuse hurled at a millionaire famous author while ignoring the abuse that a movement she is a figurehead of hurls at trans people on a daily basis. It's people like MP Rosie Duffield, who gets interviewed in The Times, claiming that trans people's existence is somehow creating a situation for women like Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. A book I would urge Rosie to read more thoroughly for what it has to say about trans people. The Handmaid's Tale correctly observes that trans people are among the first targets of the same fascists who would seek to take away all the rights of cisgender women too. So no, it isn't feminists who kill trans people. Most trans people, after all, are feminists. It's just people who call themselves feminists who act as arbiters in a debate about whether we get to live or die. It's just people who call themselves feminists who give talking points to violent bigots who do kill us. It's just people who call themselves feminists who shy away from the truth and report divisive tripe instead. Just a fortnight ago, after LGBTQ+ Labour called for Rosie Duffield's bigotry to be investigated, after years of complaints to the party, the complacent centrist party leadership finally opened an investigation. We can make our supposedly progressive institutions do better if we demand change. But they have to stop treating our lives as a debate. Full stop. We have to challenge organizations who make hollow gestures of acceptance towards our community while getting in bed with the same bigotry that would seek to make us extinct. The truth, if there are any journalists around who are interested in the truth, if you happen to see anyone, the truth is that trans people are incredible. Trans lives are so full of joy and unbridled happiness that it defies words. The joy of finding your authentic self, the joy of reclaiming your body in a way that you thought you never would be able to, the joy of being seen by the people who love you as the person you are for the first time in your life. These are joys that can never be extinguished. I would ask cisgender people present to imagine the joy a trans person feels the first time they look in the mirror and recognize the person looking back at them as themselves. Trans lives aren't just worth living. Trans lives are beautiful and joyous and inspiring. Trans people are a gift. Trans people are a blessing. And people with trans people in their lives know that. There is no debate. There are trans lives, and there are people who don't know any trans people who want to use us as a distraction to stop people from paying attention to the way that our politicians are failing all of us. There are, of course, truths that, if there are any journalists who are interested in the truth, I will happily give them to speak to power. Here are some examples. For example, I will happily tell any journalist listening how trans masculine people have had their access to genital surgery quietly shut down. It doesn't exist in the UK at all right now. For example, NHS wait times are many times longer than the maximum time allowed. People are waiting for years. Trans people are dying waiting for their first appointment. And cis people can access the exact same medications without waiting. This is medical segregation. Or how the government is trying to legislate gender-neutral bathrooms out of existence, or how Sajid Javid is using the trans debate narrative set up by so-called feminists to threaten the rights of trans people further, or how I, and many, many other people I know, have submitted complaints to the Labour Party about their continued defences of bigotry, which until very recently have fallen on deaf ears. If there are any journalists around here who are interested in the truth, I'm happy to talk about how this country is trying to push trans people out of public life in an attempt that should be called exactly what it is: genocidal. There is so much truth here, if any journalists are interested. We have to demand better from our news media, and not just the right-wing papers, but also the progressive paper of record. For as long as the media perpetuates the trans debate narrative, we shouldn't be accepting it, we shouldn't be buying it, and we should be calling it out every chance we get. And I'll say this too. Marching through Soho for Trans Pride was good. We should show London that we are proud. Speaking outside Downing Street is good. We should let the government know that they are failing us. But we should protest Fleet Street as well as Downing Street. We should protest the offices of The Guardian, of News UK, and yeah, Broadcasting House too. We should demand better from them. Maybe we'll even find some journalists there who are interested in the truth. Thank you.